All right, today we're going to talk about a classic persuasion strategy. It's one that's as powerful as it is, well, a little controversial. We're going to dig into how getting a hard no can sometimes be the absolute fastest way to get the yes you wanted all along. So let's just dive right in. I mean, we've all been in this spot, right? You need to ask for something. Could be a favor, maybe a donation, help on a project, but you have this feeling you're pretty sure the answer is just going to be no. So, is there a way to flip those odds? Well, it turns out psychology has a really specific and kind of fascinating answer to that. And that answer? It's a method that's been studied for decades, and it's called the door-in-the-face technique. I know, it sounds a bit aggressive, but it's a surprisingly effective strategy for getting people to agree with you. So what is this thing exactly? Just picture this. You're selling something door to door. You knock, you make this huge, over-the-top request, and bam, the door gets slammed in your face. But then you ask for something much, much smaller, and the door, well, it creaks back open. That's the whole idea right there. You lead with a massive request that you fully expect to get shot down. It's really just a simple two-step dance. First, you make an extreme, pretty burdensome request. Then, after that totally predictable no, you immediately, and I mean immediately, follow up with what you actually wanted in the first place, which is a much more reasonable request. And the real magic, as we're about to see, is all in how that sequence plays out. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to go back to where it all started, to the landmark study that really put this entire technique on the map. Back in 1975, the legendary psychologist Robert Cialdini and his team decided to put this idea to the test. They had a more academic name for it, of course, a reciprocal concessions procedure. But their experiment was it was so simple, but what it revealed was huge. So here's what they did. The researchers went up to college students and hit them with this absolutely massive request. They said, hey, would you be willing to volunteer as a counselor for juvenile delinquents for 2 hours a week for the next 2 years? You can imagine what happened. Everybody said no. But then, right after the rejection, the researchers came back with their real request. Okay, I see. Well, how about this? Would you be willing to chaperone a group of them on just a single 2-hour trip to the zoo? Now, check this out, because this is where it gets wild. For the control group, who were only asked about the zoo trip, just 17% said yes. But for the group who got the door slammed in their face on that giant 2-year request first, a whopping 50% agreed to the zoo trip. Think about that. The compliance rate tripled. That is the power of this technique right there in the numbers. So this obviously leads to the big question, why? What is going on in our heads that makes us so much more likely to say yes right after we've said no? For decades now, researchers have been kicking around a few main theories. Cialdini's original idea was all about reciprocity. It's like this unwritten social rule, right? The person asking for something made a huge concession. They backed way down from their initial big ask. So now, you feel the social pressure to make a concession of your own, to meet them in the middle. It's a psychological tit for tat. You did something for me, so now I feel like I owe you one. Okay, the second big theory is all about feelings, specifically guilt. You know that feeling when you say no to something that sounds like a good cause, like helping kids? It can leave you feeling a little, well, bad. Saying yes to that second, much easier request is a super quick way to get rid of that guilt and feel like a good, helpful person again. And the third theory is what researchers call self-presentation, which, basically means we care what people think of us. We want to look good. So after you've just flat out refused someone, you might worry. Do they think I'm unhelpful or unfriendly? So agreeing to that second request is an easy way to fix your image and show that, yeah, you're actually a pretty cooperative person. Okay, so it sounds amazing, but let's get real for a second. This is not some magic persuasion button. Decades of research have shown that while the effect is definitely real, it is not foolproof. In fact, there are some very clear situations where it just doesn't work and can even blow up in your face. And this right here is probably the single biggest catch. The hidden trap of this whole technique. A huge meta-analysis in 2012 looked at 35 years of studies and found something critical. The technique works okay for getting verbal compliance, getting someone to say, yes, I'll do it. But when it came to behavioral compliance, them actually showing up and doing the thing, the effect was almost zero. It pretty much vanished. So where does this thing just totally fall flat? Well, the research points to a few key tripwires. It crumbles if that first request is just seen as completely out of line.
It fails when it's used over and over again in relationships where trust really matters. And it doesn't work if the person you're asking just kind of takes a step back and gets into a more self-protective frame of mind.
And this legitimacy test is so important. A study all the way back in 1979 found that if your initial request isn't just big, but it's completely absurd, it doesn't create that feeling of obligation at all. It just makes you look like you're not serious, and you lose all credibility. The whole thing backfires because there's a very fine line between a big ask and a bad faith one.
And this brings us to a really big one. The one place you should probably never use this technique: long-term relationships. More recent research from 2018, it totally confirms what you'd probably guess. When you use this over and over, people start to see the pattern. They see it as manipulative, and it starts to eat away at the most important thing you have in any relationship: trust.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. After almost 50 years of research on this, what's the final call? What's the modern takeaway on this classic persuasion strategy? Here's the bottom line. The door-in-the-face technique is absolutely a real, replicable thing. But its impact is pretty modest, especially when it comes to getting people to actually follow through. So where does it work best? Think one-time requests, usually for a good cause, with people you don't know, like asking for a small donation on the street. But be careful. Try to use it in a serious negotiation or with a friend, and you really risk doing some serious damage to that relationship. And that really just leaves us with one last important question to think about. Knowing how this works tells us a lot about our own psychology, right? Our built-in sense of fairness, our desire to be helpful people. So the real question isn't just if it works, but now that you know how it works, you can spot it, and you get to decide how you're going to respond.